In a previous video, which you can see linked at the top of the screen or in the description below, I explained what the Catholic Church teaches about contraception, focusing on Pope Paul VI's encyclical Humanae Vitae, written in 1968. If you're interested in hearing about that, then please click on the card. In that video, I briefly touched on how the predictions that Pope Paul VI made about how contraception would impact society have since come true. However, I wanted to explore this more, and to talk about how those who wanted to change church teaching have been proven wrong, and most of all, the damage that widespread use of contraception has done to our society. A great source for this is an essay by Mary Eberstadt called The Prophetic Power of Humanae Vitae, which is published in the collection Why Humanae Vitae is Still Right, as well as in an article on the website First Things. I'll put links to both of these in the description. The overall message of the piece is that society has been ravaged as a result of the widespread use of contraception. I'm going to try to lay out Eberstadt's argument here. Let's dive in. Throughout the 20th century, and even to this day, an argument in favour of allowing or promoting contraception, appealing to Christians, conservatives and others, is that an increase in the use of contraception would lead to a decrease in the number of abortions. This line of thought seems to assume that attitudes towards sex would remain about the same regardless of the availability of contraception, and therefore the increased use of contraceptives would reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies, which in turn would lead to fewer abortions. This line of reasoning is false. In fact, the use of contraceptives, numbers of abortions, and out-of-wedlock births have all risen together. The fatal flaw in this argument is its assumption that attitudes towards sex will not be affected by the widespread use of contraception. But they have. Contraception was billed as freeing women from the risk of getting pregnant from sex, but it has changed male attitudes too. Now, women are perceived as having control over whether or not they get pregnant. So, when contraception fails or is forgotten, men feel no responsibility. They can think, if she's not willing to be sensible and use contraception, then the pregnancy is her fault. Why should I sacrifice my freedom by getting married, or even helping to raise the child? Without the financial and emotional support of a male partner, women are much more likely to have an abortion. Eberstadt also quotes research by Michael Pakarluk showing a legal link between contraception and abortion. Roe v. Wade, the 1973 legal case that made abortion a legal right in the USA, came only 8 years after the Supreme Court's 1965 Griswold decision, which removed legal barriers to access to contraception in Connecticut. Roe v. Wade used the right to privacy that had been inferred from the Constitution in the Griswold decision to claim a right to abortion. In short, Roe v. Wade had its legal origins in Griswold. Eberstadt links this to other countries in which we can trace a correlation between the increasing availability of the birth control device, followed by a push for abortion soon afterwards. Eberstadt calls the link between the rise of contraception and the legalization of abortion an historical fact. The most obvious way that contraception has increased the number of abortions is by making new behaviours normal that weren't normal before. Before the widespread use of contraception, casual sex was considered too risky for a lot of people, especially women. The risk of getting pregnant by a man who hadn't demonstrated his commitment to the relationship was too high. Contraception promises to remove this risk, but contraception isn't 100% effective. Therefore, the normalization of casual sexual encounters leads to accidental or unplanned pregnancies, which are likely to occur when women don't feel ready to become pregnant or don't feel supported by their male co-parent. The promotion of contraception overseas can also be seen as a form of colonialism. Eberstadt looks at Africa in particular. Substantial numbers of people in Kenya and Uganda and more than half the population in Nigeria and Ghana believe that contraception is morally unacceptable. However, Western billionaires, such as Melinda Gates, see these people's own values and culture as so insignificant that they pump billions of dollars into promoting contraception use in Africa. This is just one example, but rich Western countries routinely promote contraception in less wealthy countries, with little concern for the values of the people who live there. Humanae Vitae also warned about the risk of governments pushing the use of contraceptives on their own citizens. States in the US have already given female convicts a choice between serving time in prison and having Norplant implanted. Norplant is a contraceptive drug that's implanted under the skin, which has numerous negative side effects. Courts have also made various attempts to make access to welfare benefits dependent on having this contraceptive implanted. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, this is coercive and discriminatory. Coercive because it's falsely presented as a choice to women who don't in practical terms feel they have a choice, and discriminatory because it's specifically aimed at low-income women of colour. The ACLU describes this in a report as a reversion to an era of racism and eugenics. Contraception has also changed our culture beyond recognition. 50 Shades of Grey is the best-selling book in Amazon's history. It's a story of a powerful, rich man bullying, humiliating, and committing violence against a woman for the purpose of sexual pleasure. And the audience for this book is in a large part women themselves. The visual garb of sadomasochism, with the straps and ties that are used to disempower people as sexual objects, has become an ever-present part of women's fashion and the supposedly glamorous outfits of women in the music industry. And it isn't in Eberstadt's essay, but I would add that the lovable womanizer character in TV shows, such as Barney Stinson in How I Met Your Mother, Joey Tribbiani in Friends, and others, is relevant here too. They're presented as funny, lovable, and desirable for men to imitate. The main joke is that they serially use women as sexual objects, discarding them or refusing to acknowledge their existence once they no longer bring sexual pleasure. The sexual objectification of women is now a key part of our entertainment culture. One of the key arguments that was made for contraception when Humanae Vitae was published was the spectre of overpopulation. All sorts of disasters were predicted as a consequence of population growth, but this has been thoroughly debunked, including in the secular world. An example of a secular writer acknowledging this is Matthew Connelly's book Fatal Misconception: The Struggle to Control World Population, which is highly critical of the population control movement. In fact, the opposite problem to overpopulation seems to be coming about. Isolation and loneliness amongst elderly people is a serious problem in France, Portugal, Sweden, Germany, and especially Japan, where there's an industry that specialises in cleaning houses where an elderly person has died and decomposed for some time before being discovered. Eberstadt points out that the studies reporting on loneliness of the elderly conspicuously never talk about children, or how their presence or absence might affect the likelihood of loneliness in old age. The final part of Eberstadt's essay that I'd like to talk about is the fact that many churches that have adapted their sexual teaching to fit the culture have seen their numbers drop suddenly. A good example is the Episcopal Church in the US, which has experienced rapid, consistent decline ever since the year 2000, which Eberstadt links directly with their adaptation of their sexual teaching. There's also serious schism and dissent in the global Anglican Church over the desire of some to change and update what the Anglican Church teaches on sexuality. Other churches should be watching this with caution. These are what I considered the strongest arguments in Eberstadt's essay, but there are plenty more. To read it for yourself, you can click on the link below. If you like this, please consider subscribing or pressing the like button. Thanks for watching.